It's all right. Let's get going. Um, Welcome. Really excited to be here with all of you. Last year we helped over a third of Stanford and Harvard and a bunch of other schools with deferred applications. This year I actually think it might be like well over 50%. So we're excited to help. We're helping a lot of people with deferred applications. Many of you, and I know many of the names on this are already working with coaches. If you're not, don't wait till the end. I can't tell you how many people like 2 weeks before, like, oh, it turns out these essays are really hard, and then ping us, and we'll help you then too. Don't worry, but you'll get a much better product if you start now. So make sure you schedule time with our team if you haven't, or sign up, and you can browse through different options yourself. Tonight is how to shine in your deferred MBA applications. We're going to cover a lot of ground. We'll go into different topics and won't have time to cover everything in depth, but we'll do the best we can. Quick agenda for you. We'll do some introductions and then spend most of the time on the expert panel. And feel free to drop questions in the chat too, if you have them. I'm John, the CEO of Leland. I was a deferred admit to Harvard and Stanford like 8 years ago. I then bought deferredmba.com because no one was talking about deferred MBAs. Still own it. It just pretty much points to Leland at this point, but was one of the first people talking about deferred MBAs, and so have done a lot in this space. But I'm going to lean on my panelists who are probably even more knowledgeable than me at this point about deferred MBAs. You also see Erica and Izzy and Amelia in the chat, dropping links and other things, and they helped to organize this. So big thanks to them and the other members of the Leland team. And we have an awesome panel tonight. I'm going to kick it over to each of them to introduce themselves, but we're really lucky to have the lineup we have tonight. So Yash, take it away, and then we'll go to Jerry and Ben.
Thanks, John. Thanks everyone for joining today. I'm really excited that you guys are all applying to deferred MBA programs. My name is Yash Gupta. I applied to both the GSB and HBS back in 2018 as a deferred candidate and was fortunate enough to get into both. Just graduated from the GSB in June of 2023. And I've been coaching candidates basically since I got in 2018 across all the M7. So I'm excited to hopefully work with some of you soon.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Jerry Tobum. As you can see, I was a former HBS admissions board member for about 8 years and was part of the crew that ended up launching the 2+2 program. So super familiar with it. Love it. Love the applicants. That was my sector for a couple years that I managed. So, familiar with kind of what the schools like to see and how to make yourself stand out. So we'll talk all about that tonight. But good to see you all. Good luck with everything.
Bring us home, Ben.
Hey, everybody. Also, just wanted to say, hey, I grew up in Queens, New York, so shout out to anybody from the area. Went to WashU for undergrad, and then went to McKinsey afterwards. Then moved to the Chicago mayor's office, and then went off to GSB for 2 years. After which, I've done a number of things, but most recently started a chess company, and I've been doing a ton of coaching through Leland for the past, I guess, year and a half now. Somehow, guys. And so really focus a lot on working with folks, refine their essays, figure out like creative ways to brainstorm and create a compelling narrative. But also I'm doing, I think I've maybe two more people I might be able to work with for a comprehensive package for this cycle. So end-to-end application stuff, but I've had some surprising success in the past year and a half and excited to keep it moving.
Yeah, not surprising at all. These three are three of the best. All three of them have like 1 or 2 spots left. So if you're interested, definitely ping them. If you don't know where to start, feel free to reach out to our team, set up a call. We'll drop that link in there. We chat with people all the time. I'm also happy to chat with anyone as well. So feel free to ping me. Yeah, let's jump in. So if you can also, we'd love to get to know you because many of you are we don't see your faces. Some of you we see your faces, but for those of you on this call, if you could drop where you're attending college and what your dream MBA program is, that'd be great. It's nice to just hear from you. Get the chat warmed up here. Got BYU and HBS. Got Berkeley, HBS. We got Oxford, Northwestern or Chicago, Darden. Just wait till the international folks roll in. Come on, where's the international? I know you're out there. We always have University of St. Gallen. Where I don't know where that is. I don't know. Maybe I should know where that is.
Excellent.
Switzerland. All right, there it is. Love that. Cool. Well, good to have you all here. I know there's nothing you'd all rather be doing than learning about deferred MBAs on your Thursday evening, so we're really glad to have you. Just quick introduction. Many of you already know what Leland is, but we do coaching, which is, kind of our bread and butter, match you to great people like are on this call that have varying price points and experience levels. So we really want to meet you where you're at and get you to the best that you can afford and help you reach your goals. We also do tons of free community events like this one. We're ramping that up. I think we're doing like 50 different events, or 50 in the next like 2 months. So make sure you sign up so you stay in the loop. And that's anything from MBA applications to career advancement and all sorts of other things. So definitely stay in the loop there. And then we also have Leland Plus, which is a content subscription. It's become really popular, especially for deferred candidates to kind of get going, where you get access to video content, example resources, all sorts of other things like that. And then we recently rolled out some subscriptions that kind of include coaching and content. So reach out to the team for that. We can kind of talk you through some of those options. But we're here to help you. We want to make this as affordable as possible and make sure that you can reach your goals. This is going to be you next. My favorite part of the job is getting the text that's like, I got into X school or I got into this job. I'm sure all the coaches have these like framed. I have a whole folder of them on my computer. This is real. I never thought that I could get into these top programs, and thankfully had a coach who's on Leland at this point, but he was super helpful, and I feel so lucky to have that. And I didn't have a coach for undergrad, didn't know anything about this space. So don't go at these processes alone. The best people have coaches, and you should have them too. All right, we're going to shift gears to the expert panel. We're going to pack this in. We have about 35 minutes left. We're going to try to answer as many questions as possible. If you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. As we mentioned, we'll try to monitor it as best we can. So just to kick things off, I think it's helpful for just people to know like where to start. And many of you have kind of different styles, and that's great too. Some people start with resumes, some people start with essays, but I'm curious, we'll just go around the horn. Maybe we'll start with Ben on this time. Where do you start with applicants? What are the first steps that they should be taking, just to make sure they're kind of on track?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the best way to think about the MBA process, and really just applying to anything in general, is like, what can you get moving in parallel? And then what is like kind of a large volume of work you can work on simultaneously? So to that end, what I typically like to do, and also I would say that some things just take time to marinate. Like I would say, like some recipes, it says like, let's sit for 60 minutes. Like you actually need time for things to move around your brain a little bit. And you can't just always just brute force something out. So to that end, I typically tell folks to get the recommender piece started as early as possible. In the meantime, right, like send me your resume. I can read over like any written materials, get an idea of your writing style. Then I quickly like to set up an essay workshop with folks to get the gears turning on essays. And then, yeah, I think it's a drafting, iterating process, but that's how I like to think about it: parallel versus bulk work.
Sorry, Jerry and Yash, anything you'd add?
Yeah, just one other thing. I think that makes a lot of sense, kind of making sure you're getting as much accomplished, in this one period of time. So doing things in parallel. I think one additional thing to getting your recommenders up and running, I think it's also doing some sort of like discovery, self-reflection piece. So that's often, the first thing I'll do with my clients is kind of, I ask them to, complete this like discovery document, which is kind of the hard part, like the self-reflection that like most people don't love doing, but it's like really important for this process. So, can you describe your core values? What is like one defining moment in your life? Describe an ethical dilemma you faced. Who are the most important people in your life and why? What have they taught you? All of these things are kind of the hard questions, but it really, like, to Ben's point, gets you marinating, gets the juices moving. And then that way, when it comes time to like dive into the more tactical writing an essay kind of thing, you have a lot of ideas. You've kind of done some of the pre-work. So I would say I would just add that to some of what Ben said.
That's great.
Yeah, not much to add. I would say I've done both of those things. I think that conversation, to Jerry's point, is super important. especially as a coach and where we sit. I think like understanding everything you've done, what are you most proud of? What do you want to highlight? That's so different for every applicant. And also, by the way, for every school is looking for something slightly different, and your narrative needs to match that as well. So I think that's a really important part of the discovery process.
Yeah, that's great. I think just to kind of round it out, I think for me, tactically what it looked like was I actually started with my resume, which I didn't think I was like, I got a good job. Like I don't need any work on my resume. And then my coach like tore it to pieces. And I realized that MBA programs are also like you kind of need to level it up for the application process. And then I think recommenders, you always want to give them at least a month if you can. They're probably going to do it in one day, but like give them a month to pick the day, right? You don't want to force them to do it like the day before. It shows how serious you're going to take the process, and then maybe they even send it to you to like get your quick reactions to it. So there's lots of there's lots of things that need to be moving. And I know a lot of you are also like simultaneously studying for the GMAT or the GRE, which is incredibly stressful, but is like something that try to knock out as early as you can, and try to give yourself the chance to take it more than once. So anyways, lots of things to think about. We're going to jump into a few of these. Well, let's start with you, Jerry, on this, and then we'll let Ben and Yash kind of fill it out. But what are these schools looking for in the deferred process? Of course, there's like general things that all MBA programs are looking for, period, deferred or traditional. But maybe kind of cover that, and just like specifically deferred. What should they be kind of thinking about?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think like a grounding place is kind of knowing what, to Yasha's point, sort of each school has, some specifications as to who they're
Yep.
looking for and what they care most about, right? And each of them have their own little flavor. So there's that piece, and you want to make sure you kind of understand those differences, but then outside of that, I think when they're looking at deferred applicants, right? Obviously they know the work experience part isn't there. So what else, outside of that makes you special, makes you interesting, makes you different, right? So, essentially like the one big piece that they're looking at for, the general applicant pool, the resume and work history isn't there. So then you kind of think, okay, great. What else? What is it about me that I can really highlight to them? What have I done sort of in my school career? What have I taken advantage of? Where have I led? What things have I started? They really like people who are proactive, who are, eager to make a difference. So where have you like identified a problem, something that was going on? Maybe the school didn't have enough freshman housing where you were, and you said, you know what, I want to do something about this. And so, you went and talked to the right people and make a difference at your school. They want to see people that, again, really can make an impact, care about their communities, and can make a difference. So I think those are, a couple of the things to think about. I think also they like to see, breadth in what you've done and what you kind of, your history. So if you're someone who, has been playing piano since you were 2, and you still do recitals, like those are interesting pieces to you that really make you sort of an interesting, unique candidate. So all of those things are being looked at and considered and count too. In addition to those kind of more standard, hey, here's what you need for an MBA kind of thing.
Yeah, that's great. Yash or Ben, anything you'd add to this?
Yeah, from my point of view, I think one other thing that's really important is a plan, right? And a roadmap for who you are and who you want to be, and how the MBA is going to fit into that. To Jerry's point, they're missing such a big data point in terms of work experience, that they want to understand like what your plan is and what you're going to do in that deferred 2 or 3 years that you're deferring, and also what you've done in college that can translate to whatever it is you want to do post MBA. And so I think having a very clear narrative and story, and plan for what you want to do, is super, super important.
Yeah, that's great. I think the only thing I might just throw on top of that is I really like the point you make, Gary, around especially around just like initiative taking. I would add that I think once you've taken initiative, be consistent. So you make something for, it takes you 6 months to get something off the ground. That's awesome. Did you do it for the next 2.5 years and then set up a succession plan for your school to keep that thing going for years and years and years? I think the consistency and that trickles into like leadership and the way you can demonstrate leadership and growth. I think that's a key separator at the deferred stage.
Yeah, those are all really great. Maybe one last thing I would add on this front, and we're going to talk a little bit about like overrepresented or traditional backgrounds, which a lot of people get nervous about. Some schools, as Jerry mentioned, like call out specifically, like HBS, the specific groups they're looking for. And so if you don't fit into those, you can kind of be stressed about that. Other schools tend to accept, generally people that they like to accept in the normal application process, but you still have to kind of give them that confidence. If I were to distill it down into two things, and I think this is true for traditional, but I think it's especially true of deferred. I think you need to prove to them that you are high potential, and you need to prove to them that you are different from everyone else that's high potential. And if you're going to McKinsey, you sort of checked the like, all right, that's a high potential career path. That's a really hard, job to get. But how are you different than all the other people going to McKinsey? And if you're going to a nonprofit or you're working on your startup, how are they going to know that was high potential or that you just didn't get the job at McKinsey, right? And so you're kind of balancing these things based on the background that you're headed to and trying to help them understand and legitimize. This is one thing that I had worked on a startup in college, and the coach that I worked with was like, hey, a lot of people work on startups. Is this like a real startup or is this like a dinky startup? Because these admissions people, they've seen it all, right? They've seen every nonprofit started, and they know what they know what people are doing just to get things on their resume. And it doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It just means that you want to show legitimacy, and I think to Ben's point, some of that consistency over time. Okay, let's talk about resume. And maybe we'll start with you, Yash, on this. How did you and how do you help your clients kind of think about the primary differences between like a traditional recruiting resume versus an MBA resume?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think there is a lot of overlap, right? I think a lot of times we'll work with candidates right after they've gotten a job, and I think so. Some of that impact-driven approach, I think, still is really helpful. So having specific metrics, you talking about how you improve the situation, I think that's really important. The two things that I would highlight, I think one is leadership. I think that becomes such a big part of the MBA application. That I don't think it's still important for jobs, but you might have more internship experiences. You might want to focus on that more for jobs. But I think leadership is super important, and anything around teamwork, I think highlighting that is really important. And then two, to your earlier point, John, I would say up-leveling it, keeping it a bit more well-rounded, adding in more hobbies, just showing you who you are as a person overall, more than as a job applicant. I think that's really important as well.
Yeah. Jerry or Ben, anything else you'd add on this?
Yeah, I mean, totally agree. I think, another potential difference there is, you want to make it, I mean, I guess a regular resume for a job, super readable is important too. But oftentimes people, I think, write in sentence structure. And I often say, like, it takes too long for AdCom to read a full sentence. Like, you want to make it as readable, as possible. So I think it's really important. They're looking at that maybe for a minute max. And so, saying what you need to say in the shortest amount of words is really important. And then just like, Yash said, I think, the MBA resume typically has a little bit more personality. There should really be an interest section. They're going to see your extracurriculars. They're going to, you're going to see community service, volunteering. Not all of that is typically on a job resume. So you want to show more personality in all those pieces. And then overall, I think just less industry jargon, right? When you're applying to a specific job, you can leave a lot of that stuff in there because where you're applying most likely knows all that stuff. But you have to know the person from AdCom reading it. Oftentimes, they're not in the weeds. They don't know that stuff, right? So you kind of have to remove all the jargon. Really a lot of that detail isn't necessary. And you just want to focus on highlighting what are the skills, what are the impact. That's the stuff so that anybody, whether they have the background or not, is going to understand what you're saying.
That's really
not much to add, guys. I would just say, especially for those with that I've seen with technical backgrounds, really make sure it doesn't say programmed SQL database nobody, if you can't explain it to your grandma, don't make an MBA admissions person try to read it. So I think simplicity is great.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's interesting. Even if you just look at take HBS interview questions, oftentimes they're asking you for your perspective on what would you do if you were the leader, you were in charge or whatever. And so if you can't submit a resume that shows that you actually thought about what the leader might have considered, when you delivered this, SQL database or whatever it is that you worked on, why did the CEO of that organization care about that work? That's the up leveling. It really matters versus a job. They actually might care about the technical details of how you programmed that SQL database because they might need you to do the exact thing and they don't actually care what the impact was. They just needed to do that skill set. So, yeah, those are really good points. Ben, we'll go back to you for this one. How do you, and I know you just kind of put together a recommender prep guide in depth, which is great, but how do you recommend people go about, selecting and preparing recommendations because they're so important.
Yeah, I think the best letters of recommendation, they require some forethought. They require dedication. They require some longevity in the relationship that you've built with someone. So how do you actually end up getting powerful letters of recommendation? It's not February 15th and you're like, oh, I gotta go get a great letter of recommendation. I hope someone writes me like a glowing review. Like that's not what you're actually looking for. It's, hey, can you go above and beyond in a particular role or alongside or leading a particular team and do that and in a manner that is scaling, expanding what you are already doing in your work with the recommender. And I think oftentimes like great letters of recommendation come from seeing you either experience a lot of growth and become put into place or create impact in a way that's meaningful and or across multiple contexts. So if they see you in the classroom and outside the classroom, like those types of things are great, especially since I think there's a lot of classroom specific recommendations, and a lot of schools actually basically tell you don't do that. Don't just get a professor, because and the rationale behind that is they can basically say you're smart and you're engaged in a class, but there isn't as much there in terms of substance they can put into it. So multiple contexts is typically key.
Yeah, maybe just to like Jerry, I'd love your thoughts, and then Yash, as well, but specifically on the professor note. And I know that I don't want we don't speak for the schools and what they want. You should look at the schools. They will tell you. There's certain schools that do ask for a professor or an academic contact of sorts. And so you should know that, of course. But generally, Jerry, like what are the challenges with the professors? We get deferred candidates have these questions all the time.
Yeah, I think it's just kind of what Ben said. I think unfortunately, often it's like, hey, this person was lovely to have in class. They participated and they got a great grade. And you're like, okay, well, they can see the great grade on the transcript already, right? And you being sort of, a communicator and kind of, contribute in class is not quite enough, right? There's not enough robustness there. So again, what Ben said, if that professor knows you in another context as well. So, I worked with somebody who said, well, I took 3 classes with the same professor and I helped them, when they were writing their book, and we worked on a research project together. You're like, okay, now they know you in all these different contexts. They know you like well, they can speak to your skill set all around, not just in the classroom. And I think that can be worthwhile and can be a solid and strong rec. But you have to kind of just think about all of those things and make sure they have really enough to say about you, in a really strong sort of way. So yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Anything else, Yash, that you'd add on recommendations?
Yeah, not much. I guess the only thing I remind everyone is like this is one input in terms of your broader application, and I think it's a chance for you to show some of that breadth that we've talked about earlier. And so I think like treating it as a data point, if there's something that's missing in the rest of your application, or someone can provide a unique perspective on you, that like won't be in a transcript, for example, as Jerry just mentioned. I think that's super important. And I think at least I've worked with so many candidates that like were great in every other facet of their applications, but their letters of recommendation were just so general. And I think that it can be a really tough thing to overcome. So I think this is something that you really need to focus on.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I was always so stressed about the recommendations because I just felt like I couldn't control them and I just wanted to control everything. Maybe I still have that problem, but I think um, the reality is you actually can control this more than you think through good preparation and good selection. And so I dropped a recommender prep doc in the chat that you can borrow, but you can and tweak it to, of course, pull your own information and just to give them a sense for like, hey, here's some ideas that you can pull from when you're writing the recommendation. I'm not going to write it for you, but some ideas of example projects we worked on together. That really helps them to kind of jog their memory. And there's a question that came in the chat. Around like letters of recs from school alumni. I think there's a lot of factors at play here, and there's probably like 8 different dimensions. One of them might be school alumni, another one might be how senior they are at your company. There's all sorts of things that people are weighting. Never pick someone that doesn't know who you are and doesn't know you well. Like this needs to be a table thumping letter. And if you can get it from an alum or someone super senior, great. But you definitely don't want a generic letter, as Josh mentioned, that is from someone important. That doesn't matter. You need someone that knows you well and can really, really pound the table for you. Excellent. All right, we're going to spend a little bit of time on this one because it's probably the thing that most people are stressed about, is how to think about the essays. And if you're not stressed about this, you should be, because it takes a lot of drafts. I'm pretty sure I like could not get my first few drafts were like a regurgitation of my resume, and they were the worst. They were so boring. They were like you'd fall asleep reading them. My mom loved them, and everyone else hated them. My wife finally at like 1 a.m. was like, "All right, we're gonna like." I'm sick of you talking about this. We're gonna work on this, and we kind of pulled it together, but it took time. I want to hear it. Maybe I'll go back to you, Yash. How do you recommend approaching these essays? They're so hard. There's so many dimensions to them.
Yeah, I certainly don't recommend you approach it how I did it, which was way too late in the game and caused a lot of unnecessary stress. Um, I think what we talked about earlier, the preparation is so important. I think like step zero in terms of like reflecting with close friends, family members, people who really understand who you are as a person. I think just having these honest conversations with them actually helps you a ton once you actually start writing these essays. Because I've found that the prompts across schools are extremely self-reflective. Of course, some schools are more than others. And I think oftentimes if you're just writing without doing some of that reflection, it's just not going to be to the best quality. So I think that's one. I think the second, I guess, tactical piece of advice I would say is to not worry about word limits early on. I think just like I think people worry too much about that constraint, and I think just writing the full structure, everything you want to say, and just getting it all out on paper is super important because I think it's so much easier to cut down after that. And I think getting all your stories and anecdotes on paper first is the toughest part.
Yeah, that's great. Ben, anything you would add on this?
Yeah, and just as somebody who's like always kind of thinking about like what are the best ways to engage in any kind of writing process, like I mean for me the way that I do it in the class and the way that I think a lot of people to understand what works in these essays is like going through like actual battle tested essays that have worked, not even just for the school that you're targeting, but across schools. There's usually a through line or a rationale as to why those essays were universally accepted. Going through both essays that I think follow some structured formulaic ways of writing, and then exposing other folks to different styles, different ways to write, a whole range of different approaches to tackling these questions and these essays. So that's a big piece. And then I think like there are, and I fine-tuned this over like at least the past year, like I think there are some questions that are just higher yield in terms of like not just like brainstorming and just like getting a yellow pad and going sitting under a tree somewhere, but like think about like formative events in your life, key people, key moments, and trying to extrapolate what made them so important or so memorable to you, and why the people or the events that have happened in your life that were formative. I think that kind of stuff is really great for reflection. So I like to say like do brainstorming, but try to have a little bit more brain than storm. So having that approach early, I think, is super important. But also, yeah, I mean, you're hearing this in everyone on the call. I mean, my first essay just ended up in the infinite dustbin of history. It was the worst thing I've ever written, I think, in any dimension of life. And like that's often like part of like it's such an important part of the process. And almost everybody I work with, like you can never really do it, but I try to preempt people and say things like, your first draft is going to be like the worst thing you ever do. Just do it. It's like an exfoliant. Just get it out of your system, and then you can actually get to the meat of it later.
That's great. Jerry, I'd love to hear if you have any other tips.
Yeah, no, I think that's really funny because Ben, like the first thing I usually tell people is like, give yourself permission to write something terrible. Because I think people get so worried about it has to be good, it has to be right, it has to do all the things that they have a hard time starting. And so just know starting with something terrible is better than not starting. And so give yourself permission. Yep, this is going to be awful, and I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to do a brain dump. I'm going to put it all in there. And then you'll start to realize as you go through iterations with either on your own or with a coach, you're going to start to weed out like, here's the stuff that's not important. Here's the stuff that's really resonating, that really talks to like who I am. You're going to start to figure out what those pieces are and where the connection points are. And it's going to get better and better. And then, the other thing is most often if you work with a coach, they're probably going to have some frameworks that they can, help you. They can kind of give to you that will help you like approach this. So I think that sometimes helps folks just understanding like a basic framework for how to tackle it, I think can be really helpful to get you started. And then it doesn't have to match that exactly, but it's just a good starting point. So yeah, a couple other things.
Yeah, that's great. Jerry, maybe just one follow-up question. as you read through essays, did you see a lot of like, I know of course every essay is so different, but like, did you
Yeah.
see a lot of the same structure and style? Did you see a lot like a breadth? Was there any sort of like style you'd recommend, or was it just like be true to yourself? Or how do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think yes, you want to be true to yourself. I think, and if you're a little bit more of a creative writer, that's great. As long as at the end of the day you are directly answering the prompt, right? So I think occasionally some people will say, "Oh, I want to be. This is the thing I'm going to make that's going to be different, right? This is going to make me stand out," and they'll do something really kind of out there, and it doesn't necessarily, answer the prompt itself. And it's more of sort of, hey, this is how I would write something if I was in a creative writing class, right? So I think, yes, you can put your own spin on it, put your own tone on it. It doesn't have to it doesn't have to be an exact kind of format. Although to your question, like, I think, yes, most at the end of the day are pretty sort of, consistent and standard in that, because there's only so many ways you can kind of, answer those different pieces of the prompt, right? So too far outside of that and you tend to miss something. And the only other thing I would say is I'm so glad that, like John and Ben and, Yash, like you guys didn't submit, right, that first draft that was like the resume rewrite, because that sometimes unfortunately is what gets submitted, right? And when you're reading it, I mean, that's oftentimes the first thing I'll see as a coach is like, this looks like a resume rehash. And that's the first step, and that's fine. And then we do better the next time. So, you don't want to be one of those folks who ends up submitting that one, right? Like it should always be a different flavor. You're sharing something that they can't find elsewhere in your application.
Yeah, that's really good. I've found that in a lot of the people that I've worked with, there's sort of like this balance between telling stories and being productive. And sometimes I'll work with people that are like they're so deep in like the story and the descriptiveness of like, what the weather was like in this moment, that like they forget to be productive and answer the prompt and like actually show them, why this thing matters. And so they tell them all about this story, or they tell them all about themselves, but they don't connect it to like, oh, and here's why like Harvard should care about who I am. Um, or it's so productive that they don't tell any stories, and so then it's just like super boring. And I think that there's a lot to learn from that. And I think that reading through some examples I think definitely helps. We have a bunch of those in Leland Plus. But I also think that just kind of getting the resume regurgitation out, getting some of the crazy stories that you want to write out, and then you can kind of figure out what really matters. And there were a couple stories that really mattered to me, and I got rid of them because they just weren't landing. And then there were others that were important but weren't as important, and I felt but they were landing, and so I kind of used them more. So I think you can kind of figure out what makes the most sense. Okay. Here's a really, really common question. Deferred MBA, it's competitive. If my candidacy feels generic or overrepresented, I'm going to Goldman Sachs or McKinsey. What can I do to stand out? Are they even looking for these types of people? Yes. Let me open it up to any of you three if any of you want to take this one or feel strongly about it.
I do feel strongly about it because it's the only question I think I absolutely know I'm going to hear, or like the only thing I absolutely know I'm going to hear from someone in the process. I'd say about 90% of people I've worked with say some version of this, really almost seemingly independent of background. There's about 90% of people say this, and then the 10% that don't say something like, I just feel like my candidacy is too out there and disorganized. Like I don't really know, like, I feel like I wish it was more like what they expected of an MBA applicant. So grass is always greener, but like, this is all about like, what is your through line? What is your core narrative? Do not worry if you are doing something that is totally, you think is traditional. They also understand like y'all are like 20, 21. Like you can't have like, started 7 businesses and like, saved a nation from hunger. Like it's fine. Like you have a life of work experience. You've done some stuff, build consistency, have some good experiences and connect them.
Yeah. The only thing I'll add to that, like John mentioned this earlier, like high potential is still very important. They're still taking a bet on you to go out and be a great contributor to their school and then as an alum, right? So that shouldn't scare you. In fact, it should be a great it's a great stamp of approval if you are going to a top tier job that might feel more generic. From there, it's up to you and up to your coach working with you to bring out some of that creativity and bring out some of those links to the more interesting parts of your application. Because nine times out of 10, you're not going to be a career investment banker, a career consultant, or whatever it is you're doing right out of business school. You have goals, you have aspirations, you have values that might lead you in a different direction. And so I think it's about bringing those out while still showing them that you're a high potential candidate that's gotten an offer at one of these top firms.
Yeah. And Yash, you went to BCG.
Yep. Yeah, so I guess my personal story, like I was probably as traditional as it comes in terms of undergrad business, student government, was going to BCG and consulting full time. And I think for me, my story was all about sports and wanting to work in sports in the future. And I had some things that I could point to that I had done. So specific internships in undergrad, clubs that I was a part of, things like that. Yeah, I think you can definitely weave the narrative in. You just have to be, I think, deliberate and highlight the experiences you had, even if you're not going to that full time.
Yeah, that's great. Jerry, maybe the last thing, if you have anything generic to highlight, that'd be great. But also just like, I know HBS specifically has like calls out certain groups. Clearly they're not saying like, don't apply if you don't fit one of these perfectly, but like, how would you think about this? There's obviously schools that are gonna be better fits for certain people, but yeah, how do you think about it?
Yeah. It's interesting because I think it's like it's changed a little bit over time. So I think when it initially started, this, when we started this deferred program, it was, yeah, let's get the STEM folks in the door now so that we don't lose them later, right? Because they're not necessarily, they don't traditionally think about an MBA. They're going to go off into their, engineering job, and we're not going to see them. So this was a way to kind of get in front of those folks early and make sure they end up, after a few years coming into the school. But over time, I think you'll see, if you look, on any of the schools, and you can kind of see either the majors or the industries where the deferred classes are coming from, and you can see there's like a little bit more breadth now. It's not like 100% of folks are coming from majors and jobs that are in STEM, right? The schools I think are getting a little bit more flexible, or actually a lot more flexible. Some are more so than others, but in terms of who they want to see in this class. So basically, if you're going to, consulting or banking, traditionally they might have said, we're going to see this person later. We don't need to take them now. But now they're saying, well, let's see. Actually, this is the high potential person. They're super interesting. They have a lot to offer. I think they're going to go do some interesting things later in life because, like, wow, they have this interest in healthcare or this interest in sports. And so, yeah, I can see they're going to, consulting right now for a few years, but we think they have a lot going for them. Let's take them now, And so I think, if you have some of those interesting pieces to offer, then yeah, I think you do have a chance to kind of get in the door now. Like I said, you can see that they are taking folks, from a wide array, even if that wasn't originally the intent of the program. I think they don't want to lose people, the great people that they're seeing come in the door now. They're like, maybe we should take them. So, I think it makes sense to give it a go if you hit, a lot of these pieces.
Yeah, it's a great call out. All right, we're gonna have one final tip, and then we'll wrap up with a couple things that are worth hanging around for. Last thoughts. I know we didn't cover anything. We didn't cover everything. We covered as much as we could. Lots of good tips shared. Maybe Ben, we'll start with you, and then go Jerry, and then Yash.
Yeah, I've got a good tip. Open the apps. Open the actual applications. I think I've said this, I think, on a previous event, but like even like I tell the people I'm working with, and I feel like it's actually hard to get people to go in and just like click like start application for the school. And like it's funny how like even one person I just realized like I was working with on a comprehensive like package, like we had been working together for like 2 months, and I'm like doing the essays, all this stuff. I'm like, have you opened the app? I'm getting this like sense that you might not have actually opened it. It's really important because you see the volume of work that you actually have to do. And I actually think I like to have people like kind of chip away at it every day. So you actually approach those smaller questions, the ins and outs of different sections within the app that aren't like the big ticket items like the essays or the recommender or the resume. And I think that chipping away builds some confidence. But I also think if you try to rush and do all those little questions last minute, you don't want to send in an application to a school and tell them why you care so much about going there, and there's 3 typos, and like that just doesn't communicate the same thing that you want. So that's my tip, is open the actual apps.
Yeah, it's actually really good because sometimes schools do change things year to year. Like HBS changed some of the essays this year. So I actually imagine in a world of ChatGPT, that continues to happen more and more because they don't want people just regurgitating what everyone else has done. By the way, like some of you probably will use ChatGPT. You can use it for brainstorming. We've tested it extensively. I would be really careful of just submitting what you get back from that. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, which is why coaches can be super helpful. And some of our coaches even encourage people to, get a sense for reframing certain things. But yes, point being, schools do change things, open it up. Sometimes the applications are much longer than people think. Yeah. All right, Jerry, we'll go to you and then Yash.
Ben, I think it's hilarious that you said that because I thought that was only something I was seeing in folks I was working with, but it sounds like it's a thing.
Yeah.
So
Isn't it crazy though? Like it's like would you like vague? Like it's almost like people want to apply as like an outline.
right.
So,
And I'm always like, there's a lot more work in there than you think. There's a lot of little questions they ask. So, very good tip. I guess one other thing I would add is just, don't be afraid to kind of show your personality, right? Part of that question that we were talking about before, like, hey, I feel like I'm generic, I have some of the same things that other people have. Well, really, there is a piece of you, there are parts of you that are like no one else, right? And you want those to shine through. So don't, feel like, oh, this has to be super formal. It's business school, it's all serious. I can't kind of show who I am and show some personality and share stories. You can and you should. I think that's what makes you one of the ways that you can stand out as a candidate is really kind of, being transparent with who you are and sharing your, the breadth of what makes you and your interests, the personality. Again, all the schools love to see that. So that's my tip.
That's great.
And then yeah,
John.
super quickly. I know we're almost at time. I think just take breaks. I know it sounds like a controversial tip maybe, but like don't try to brute force it. And like especially if you're applying to like 4, 5, 6 schools, like it can be a lot. And I think that the work product can sometimes reflect that directly after you're feeling that way. And so start now, give yourself a ton of time so that you can build in those breaks and take some time away from the process because it can really feel all consuming with college and finding a job if you're still doing that and taking tests. And so like the more time you can give yourself and the more breaks you can take, the more successful you'll be.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, there was a question in the chat about extracurriculars, awards, and honors. There's a lot there. I definitely would. We have a lot of this in Leland Plus, and there's other things. It's obviously so dependent on each individual. I would say definitely don't wait on them to the end because a lot of people definitely do that. All right, we're gonna wrap things up. What an amazing panel! Thank you all. Here's some discount codes that they've created on their unique offerings. So if you're reaching out to them, you can screenshot these or you can, we will probably send them in a follow-up email. So, yeah, make sure you reach out to them. Again, they only have like 1 or 2 spots left. I'm not joking. Everyone gets capped at some point. So please reach out to them if you're wanting to work with them. Many of you already are. And can we show some love for them in the chat? This was super helpful. Thank you guys for taking time out of your nights to be here. Lastly, if you're still kind of figuring out where to start, feel free to schedule a call. This is kind of a round robin with a lot of the folks on our team that have experience with deferred applicants. So would love to help you. I also take a lot of these calls. So please reach out. We're here to help. Don't wait till the end. Yeah, thanks for thank you guys for showing some love in the chat. This is great. Super helpful. Last note, we actually have the booth admissions team doing an event with Leland, which is pretty cool. So make sure you register for this event. Noah is actually on the admissions team at Booth and has agreed to come and meet folks from Leland, which is really cool. So if you're applying to Booth or you want to learn more about Booth, this is a great opportunity and happening next week. So we'll drop that link in the chat as well. And you can also find it on the website, but make sure you join us. All right. And with that, we will wrap up. Thank you all.